"I was expecting someone else," Silas Boone said, standing frozen in his own dooryard while the carriage dust settled around a woman who was decidedly not the bride he had spent 4 months writing letters to secure. She was young, younger than he had pictured, with a traveling coat too heavy for a Montana summer, and a steamer trunk roped to the back of the carriage like it had traveled a great deal farther than the agency office in Helena. She looked at him with the particular steadiness of someone who had already survived worse surprises than this one, and she did not flinch at the words, though she must have heard the shock plain in them. "Then let me stay," she said, "until you find her." Silas Boone had built a life out of plain, careful decisions, the kind a man makes alone when there is no one left to make them with him, and none of his careful planning had accounted for this. He had corresponded with a woman named Charlotte Vance for 4 months through the Larkspur Territorial Agency, a schoolteacher from Ohio with tidy handwriting and a fondness for practical questions about acreage and winters, and he had sent the last of his savings for her passage west not 2 weeks past. The carriage that had just rattled up his drive under the flat white heat of a Montana August was supposed to be carrying Charlotte Vance to become his wife. Instead, it had delivered a stranger, a Chinese woman of about 20 years, standing very straight in the dust with her chin level and her hands folded in front of her like a woman bracing for a blow she had decided in advance not to show. "Who in the world are you?" he said, and heard how it came out, more accusation than question, and saw something flicker across her face before she smoothed it away again. "Suyin Zhao." She said it plainly, the way a person says a fact they are tired of having to defend. "The agency in Helena put me on this carriage and told me a rancher near Larkspur was expecting a bride. I did not choose the carriage, Mr. Boone. I only got on it because the alternative was worse." He did not ask, not yet, what the alternative had been. He was too busy turning over the plain, impossible fact that somewhere between Helena and his front gate 2 women's names had gotten crossed on a piece of agency paper, and one of them was standing in his yard while the other one, God only knew, might be standing in some other rancher's yard 40 miles distant, equally baffled. "There's been some manner of mistake," he said. "I wrote for a woman named Charlotte Vance." "I have never heard that name in my life." Su Yin's voice did not waver, though her hands had tightened where they were folded. "But I have paid for this journey with everything I owned, Mr. Boone, and I have nowhere behind me worth going back to. If your Charlotte Vance is still coming, then let me earn my keep until she arrives. I can cook, I can keep accounts, I can mend anything with a needle through it. When she comes, I will go, and you will owe me nothing but the food I ate along the way." He looked at her a long moment, the carriage driver already climbing back up to his seat, clearly uninterested in waiting around for a rancher and a stranger to sort out whose bride belonged to whom, and Silas Boone made the second impossible decision of his life inside the space of a single breath. "All right," he said, "until she comes." The carriage rolled off down the long dirt track toward Larkspur, and Silas Boone stood in his own dooryard with a woman he had never corresponded with, never expected, and had absolutely no idea what to do with, while the Montana sun beat down on both of them like it had opinions of its own about the arrangement. The ranch house was modest but sound, 2 rooms and a loft his father had built before the winter that took him, and Silas showed Su Yin to the small room off the kitchen that had once belonged to his mother, moving with the stiff carefulness of a man handling something he was afraid to break by looking at it wrong. "You'll have your own door," he said. "Bar it if it eases your mind any. I'm not in the habit of bothering women who haven't asked to be bothered." "I did not think you were." She set her trunk down at the foot of the bed. "But I thank you for saying it plain instead of leaving me to wonder." She unpacked little that first evening, as though she had learned somewhere along her journey not to put down roots she might have to pull up again fast, and Silas found himself watching her from the kitchen doorway longer than he had any business doing, trying to work out what kind of woman got put on the wrong carriage in Helena and came out the other side of it standing straighter than most men he knew. Supper that night was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from two strangers working out how much silence is polite and how much is simply avoidance. She had cooked without being asked, finding his kitchen with an ease that told him she had run one before, and the meal was better than anything he had managed alone since his mother passed. "You cook like you've done it for a household bigger than one man," he said. "I have done it for a household that was not mine to leave when I wanted to." She did not elaborate, and he did not press, though the sentence sat in the room a good while after she said it, the way a hard truth does when it is only half spoken. He wrote to the Larkspur agency the next morning, a letter as plain and careful as he could make it, laying out the mix-up and asking after both Charlotte Vance and the whereabouts of whatever rancher had been sent Su Yin Zhao's letters instead of his own. The agency clerk, a man named Otis Fenwick, who ran the Larkspur office with more enthusiasm than competence, wrote back inside the week to say the matter would be looked into directly, which Silas understood, from 4 months of correspondence with the man, to mean it would not be looked into with any particular speed at all. In the meantime, Su Yin settled into the rhythm of the ranch the way water settles into a low place in the ground, finding the shape of the work without being told twice where it needed doing. She mended the hands' shirts, kept the kitchen accounts tighter than Silas had ever managed himself, and within a fortnight had the small kitchen garden turning over vegetables that had sat neglected since his mother's death 3 summers back. The ranch hands took longer to warm to the arrangement than the garden did. 2 of them, a pair of brothers named Amos and Walt Prescott, who had worked for Silas's father before him, kept a wary distance the first 2 weeks, speaking to Su Yin only when a question required an answer, and never a word more. She did not press them for friendliness, only kept mending their shirts and setting their plates without complaint, until one evening Walt tore his sleeve badly on a fence nail, and she had it stitched so fine by morning that he could not find the seam without holding it to the lamp. After that, both brothers took to nodding when she passed, a small thing, but Silas noticed it, the way he had started noticing most small things about the household since her arrival. But it was not the town of Larkspur that took kindly to any of it. The first Sunday she came into town with him for supplies, the general store fell quiet the moment she stepped through the door, the way a room falls quiet when everyone in it has already decided what they think and is only waiting to see if anyone else will say it first. The store owner's wife, a stout woman named Bertha Wickett, looked Su Yin over from boot to bonnet, and then addressed her question to Silas directly, as though Su Yin were a piece of luggage he had brought in, rather than a person capable of speaking for herself. "Didn't know you were expecting a Chinese girl, Mr. Boone." "I wasn't." Silas kept his voice level, though something had gone tight in his jaw. "There was a mix-up with the agency. Mrs. Wickett, this is Su Yin Zhao. She's helping out at the ranch while the matter gets sorted." "Helping out?" Bertha's tone made clear exactly what she thought that phrase was covering for. "That's one word for it." Su Yin did not flinch, though Silas saw her hands go still at her sides in the particular way he was learning meant she was holding something down, rather than not feeling it at all. "I keep his accounts and mend his men's shirts, Mrs. Wickett. Nothing more scandalous than that, though I understand a woman standing quiet in a general store gives a town plenty of room to imagine otherwise." The remark landed sharper than Silas expected, sharp enough that Bertha's mouth pressed into a thin line, and he found himself fighting down something that was almost a laugh at the sight of the woman caught flat-footed by a reply she had not anticipated. They did not linger in town longer than the errand required, and on the ride back Silas found himself turning the exchange over the way he turned over a fence post he suspected was rotting from the inside. "You didn't have to answer her like that." "I have spent my whole life being spoken about as though I could not hear the words being said over my own head. I stopped letting that pass unanswered a long time ago." She looked out at the pale gold grass rolling past the wagon. "If it costs you standing in this town, Mr. Boone, I understand if you would rather I stayed quiet next time." "I'd rather you didn't." The words came out before he had entirely decided to say them, plain and a little startled at himself. Man ought to be able to stand a little talk in a store, if the alternative is asking a woman to make herself smaller so the room's comfortable. She looked at him then, a longer look than she had given him yet, and said nothing, though something in her face had eased by a small but real degree. The second trouble arrived 2 weeks later, and it did not come from the town at all. It came from Jasper Vane, whose land bordered Silas Boone's to the north, and whose ambitions, everyone in the territory understood, bordered on considerably more than that. Vane had made 3 offers for the water rights running through Silas's lower pasture in as many years, each one lower than the last, as though he expected desperation to do the negotiating for him eventually. Silas had turned him down 3 times, and Vane was not a man who took a third refusal as final. He rode up to the ranch on a hot afternoon with 2 of his hands flanking him, dismounting without being asked to, and looking over the place with the particular slow contempt of a man mentally subtracting it from someone else's ledger and adding it to his own. "Heard you got yourself a housekeeper, Boone. Heard she's Chinese." Vane's voice was pleasant, which was, Silas had learned over 3 years of dealing with the man, exactly the tone he used right before he said something designed to draw blood. "Bank examiners due through the territory next month, checking homestead claims against the improvement requirements. Man living alone with hired help instead of a proper wife might find his claim gets a harder look than a man with a legal spouse keeping his house." "My claim's been proved up fair and square for 3 years running, Vane, same as it was the last time you rode up here trying to scare me off my own water." "Wasn't trying to scare anybody. Just passing along what I heard." Vane's eyes slid to Su Yin, who stood in the doorway with a dish towel still in her hands, and something in his gaze made Silas step half a pace sideways without entirely deciding to, putting himself between the 2 of them. "Territory's got opinions about mixed households, Boone. Opinions that could make an examiner nervous if the wrong word reached his ear before he arrived." "You threatening to go whisper in an examiner's ear, Vane, or are you asking to sell me your water rights instead, on account of you're the one whose herd's been dying of thirst these past 2 summers?" Vane's pleasant expression did not change, but something behind it went colder, and Silas understood, watching it happen, that he had just made an enemy considerably more determined than the one he had walked outside with a moment before. "You'll want to think careful on your arrangements before that examiner comes through," Vane said, mounting back up. "Man in your position can't afford too many complications at once." He rode off with his 2 hands trailing him, and Silas stood watching the dust settle behind them with a knot forming low in his gut that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "You should have seen his face the first time you turned down his offer," he said to Su Yin, more to fill the silence than because the memory helped anything. "Man's been circling this water for 3 years like a coyote that can't figure out the fence has a gate. Now he thinks he's found a new way through it." "Men like that always believe there is a way through, if only they look hard enough for the weak board." She watched the riders shrink toward the horizon. "I have known men like Mr. Vane before, though they wore different clothes and spoke a different tongue. They mistake patience for permission." "He means to make trouble over the claim," Su Yin said quietly, coming to stand beside him. "He means to make trouble over the water, same as he's tried 3 times before. This is just a new lever to pull." Silas turned to face her. "I'm sorry you had to stand there and hear a man talk about you like a problem to be solved, instead of a person standing 10 feet away." "I have heard worse said plainer. At least this one dressed it up in pleasant words first." She said it without self-pity, only fact, the same flat honesty she had used the day she stepped off the carriage. "What will you do?" "I don't rightly know yet, but I know I'm not selling that water to a man who thinks he can pry it loose by scaring an examiner into doubting my claim." That night, after the hands had gone to the bunkhouse and the kitchen lamp burned low, Silas found Su Yin sitting at the kitchen table with a letter in her hands, one she had clearly been carrying since Helena and had not yet worked up the courage to burn or answer. "You don't have to tell me," he said, seeing her fold it quickly when she noticed him in the doorway. "Whatever it is." "I think I do, though. If Vane means to use whatever he can find against this ranch, you ought to know exactly what he might find before he finds it first and hands it to you twisted into something uglier than it is." She set the letter on the table between them, worn soft at its folds the way a thing gets from being read too many times. "This is from my uncle in San Francisco. He arranged a marriage for me to a merchant twice my age, a man with a reputation for cruelty to the 2 wives he had already buried. I did not choose to go on that carriage to Helena by accident, Mr. Boone. I chose it on purpose, the day before the wedding was to happen, with money I had saved in secret for 2 years exactly for that purpose. The agency letter I answered was never meant for a bride heading your direction. I simply took the first ticket west that would put enough territory between myself and San Francisco that my uncle could not easily follow." Silas sat down slowly across from her, turning this new shape of things over the way he turned over a fence post, testing where the rot went deep. "So there's no Su Yin's owl letter that got crossed with my Charlotte Vance letter at all. You were never meant for any rancher in this territory." "No, I invented a purpose for myself out of another woman's mistake, because it was easier to be mistaken for somebody's bride than to be caught as somebody's runaway. If your Charlotte Vance never wrote back, and if this examiner comes asking hard questions about who exactly lives in this house and why, the truth is worse than a clerical error, Mr. Boone. The truth is that I am not lost. I am hiding, and I have been hiding in your house for a month, letting you believe otherwise." The lamp guttered between them, and for a long moment Silas said nothing at all, weighing the difference between a woman who had arrived by accident and a woman who had arrived by design, and finding, to his own quiet surprise, that the second one troubled him less than he expected. "You told me the day you stepped off that carriage that you had nowhere behind you worth going back to. That was true then, and it's true now, whichever way you came to be standing in my yard." He met her eyes across the table. "I'm not in the business of sending a woman back to a man who buried 2 wives already. Whatever Vane finds to use against me, he'll have to find it without my help handing it to him." "You could lose the claim over this." "I could lose the claim over plenty of things. A man doesn't build a life by only doing the safe thing every time trouble shows up at his gate." He said it plainly, the way she had taught him over the past month, that plain was the only honest way to say a hard thing. "Charlotte Vance never answered my last 2 letters anyhow. I expect she found a rancher closer to home, or decided Montana winters weren't worth the trouble. Either way, I stopped waiting on her a while back, if I'm honest about it." Su Yin looked at him a long moment, something working behind her eyes that he could not entirely read, and then she folded the letter one final time and set it aside, as though the telling of it had lightened something she had been carrying since Helena. "Then I suppose we are both people who ended up somewhere we did not plan to be," she said, "and found a reason to stay anyhow." The bank examiner arrived on a Thursday 2 weeks later, a narrow, unhurried man named Cyrus Bell, who walked the property with a ledger under his arm and asked exactly the kind of questions Vane had promised he would ask, questions about improvements and residency and the particulars of who exactly occupied the second bedroom of a bachelor rancher's house. Silas answered plain, same as he answered everything, laying out the mix-up with the agency and the arrangement that had followed, without dressing it up softer than it was, and without apologizing for it either. Su Yin stood beside him through the whole of it, answering the examiner's direct questions to her own satisfaction rather than letting Silas speak for her, which seemed, more than once, to surprise the man into taking her more seriously than he had clearly expected to. Bell walked the fence lines and the outbuildings with the patient thoroughness of a man who had seen enough failed claims to know exactly what a real one looked like, checking the barn's repairs against the improvement dates Silas had logged, running a hand along the well housing, asking after the acreage under cultivation with the flat, careful questions of a man building a picture rather than looking to trip anyone up. Silas found himself relaxing by degrees as the morning wore on, the examination proceeding the way honest work usually did when a man had nothing to hide from it. It was going, as far as Silas could tell, about as well as such an awkward conversation could go, right up until the moment Jasper Vane rode up, unannounced, with a folded newspaper clipping in hand and a look on his face like a man who has been saving a card for exactly the right moment to play it. "Mr. Bell." Vane dismounted without being asked to, same as always. "Glad I caught you before you finished your report. Thought you'd want to see this before you signed off on anything." He handed over the clipping, and Silas watched Cyrus Bell's face change as he read it, going from polite neutrality to something guarded and careful. "This is a notice from a San Francisco paper," Bell said slowly, "regarding a young woman who fled an arranged marriage under circumstances the family is calling theft on account of certain jewelry that went missing from the household the same night she disappeared." The kitchen went very still. Silas felt something cold drop through his chest, not because he doubted Su Yin, not for one moment, but because he understood in that instant exactly how thoroughly Vane had done his work, and exactly how little it would matter to a territorial examiner whether the accusation was true, so long as it was ugly enough to cast a shadow over the whole household. "I took nothing that was not already mine," Su Yin said, her voice steady, though her hands, Silas saw, had gone white-knuckled at her sides. "A pair of earrings my own mother left me before she died, which my uncle claimed as household property the moment he arranged my marriage, on the reasoning that everything a woman owns becomes her husband's the day she is promised to him, whether or not the wedding has yet occurred. I did not steal. I took back what was mine before a man I had never agreed to marry could claim it as his." "That's a fine distinction for a courtroom to sort out," Vane said, not unpleasantly, which was exactly what made it dangerous. "But Mr. Bell here has got a homestead claim to evaluate, and a household under suspicion of harboring a wanted woman isn't the kind of improvement that reflects well on a man's judgment. Wouldn't you agree?" Cyrus Bell looked between the three of them, clearly uncomfortable with the position he had been maneuvered into, a man who had come to check fence lines and outbuildings and now found himself asked to weigh a criminal accusation from 4 states distant. "I'll need to note this in my report," Bell said finally. "I can't simply set aside an allegation like this, whatever the truth of the underlying matter may be." It was Su Yin, not Silas, who broke the silence that followed, stepping forward with the same steady chin she had worn the day she climbed down from the carriage a month before. "Then note this as well, Mr. Bell. Note that the newspaper clipping Mr. Vane is so eager to hand you did not travel 4 states on its own accord. Someone had to write to San Francisco for it, had to know exactly where to look and exactly what to ask for, which means Mr. Vane has spent considerable time and money digging into my past for the express purpose of using it against this ranch. Ask yourself why a neighboring rancher would go to such trouble over a household examination that has nothing to do with him, unless the water running through Mr. Boone's lower pasture was worth a good deal more to him than the truth. Bell's eyes moved to Vane, and something in his examiner's instinct, the same instinct that had made him a careful reader of ledgers for a dozen years, seemed to catch on the shape of what she was suggesting. "Is that true, Mr. Vane? Did you commission this inquiry yourself?" "I merely came across the information through an acquaintance." Vane's pleasant tone had thinned considerably. "What I do with information that falls in my path is my own business." "It falls remarkably conveniently in your path for a man who has made 3 documented offers on this ranch's water rights in as many years, all on record at the county office." Bell closed his ledger with a small, final sound. "Mr. Vane, I believe I have what I need from this property. I may need to speak with you separately about the nature of your interest in this examination, given how closely it appears to track with your own business dealings nearby." Vane's face went through several expressions in quick succession, before settling on something that was not quite anger and not quite fear, but sat uncomfortably close to both. He mounted back up without another word and rode off, and this time there was no pleasant parting threat trailing behind him, only the sound of hooves retreating fast across dry summer grass. Cyrus Bell finished his examination without further incident, noting the household arrangement plainly in his report as an employment matter pending the resolution of an agency clerical error, and making no mention at all of San Francisco earrings or missing jewelry, which he seemed to have decided on reflection belonged to a different jurisdiction entirely than the one he had been sent to examine. When his wagon had rolled off down the drive, Silas found Su Yin standing very still by the kitchen window, her hands finally loosening from the fists they had made through the whole ordeal. "You didn't have to defend yourself so plain in front of a government man. Could have let me handle Vane and kept your own trouble quieter." "I have spent my whole life letting other people decide what should be said about me, while I stood by and let it happen. I told you once I stopped letting that pass unanswered." She turned to face him. "I was not going to start again in front of the one man in this territory whose opinion might actually cost you something real." "It cost you plenty just now, telling a stranger about your uncle and the earrings in front of Vane, where the whole territory'll likely hear the shape of it inside a week." "Better the whole territory hears it plain from my own mouth than twisted through Vane's, which was always going to happen the moment he found that clipping." She looked at him steadily. "I am tired of being a secret in your house, Silas. I would rather be a known thing that some people dislike than a hidden thing that gets used against you whenever a man like Vane goes looking for a lever to pull." Something in the way she said his given name for the first time since she had arrived settled into the room like a change in the weather, and Silas found he did not have a single careful, plain word ready to answer it with. 3 months passed, and the Larkspur territory had settled into its own version of quiet regarding the arrangement at the Boone Ranch, the way a town does once a story it had decided to be scandalized by simply stops giving it new material to work with. Jasper Vane had not ridden up the drive again, occupied instead with a formal inquiry from the Territorial Land Office regarding his conduct toward Cyrus Bell's examination, an inquiry that Bell himself had seen fit to initiate the week following his visit. Charlotte Vance's answer finally arrived by post in late September, 3 months overdue and considerably shorter than any of her previous letters, informing Silas that she had married a grain merchant in Cincinnati that spring, and wished him well in whatever arrangement he had settled on in her absence. A sentence that struck Silas, reading it on his own porch, as considerably less painful than he might once have expected it to feel. The ranch itself bore the plainest proof of the season's changes. The lower pasture's water rights remained exactly where they had always been, unsold and unclaimed by anyone but Silas Boone, and the kitchen garden Sue Yen had coaxed back to life that first fortnight had yielded enough through the summer to fill the root cellar for the coming winter twice over. Bertha Wickett, of all people, had taken to nodding a stiff but genuine greeting whenever Sue Yen came into the general store, a change Silas suspected had less to do with any softening of the woman's opinions and more to do with a healthy respect for a person who had faced down a bank examiner and a scheming neighbor in the same afternoon and come out the better for it. He found Sue Yen on the porch on an evening in early October, the heat of summer finally breaking into something gentler, and he sat down beside her without asking, which had become, over the past months, simply the way things were done between them. "Charlotte Vance's letter came today," he said. "She married someone else back in Cincinnati." "I am sorry, if that troubles you." "It doesn't. Truth is, it stopped troubling me a good while back, somewhere around the time a stranger stepped off the wrong carriage and told a room full of gossiping women in a general store exactly what she thought of their manners." He turned to face her fully. "I never did finish asking you something I started asking, back when we thought there was still a Charlotte Vance coming to claim the place you were keeping warm for her." "What is that?" "Whether you'd stay. Not until somebody else came to take your place, but because there isn't going to be anybody else, and hasn't been for a good while now, if I'm honest about when I stopped waiting." He held her gaze steady, the same way she had held Cyrus Bell steady the day Vane tried to bury her under a stranger's accusation. "I'm asking you to stay as my wife, Sue Yen. Not my housekeeper, not a woman minding the place until the real bride shows up. You are the only bride this ranch has ever actually needed, whatever the agency's paperwork said back in Helena." She was quiet a long moment. The kind of quiet he had learned over 3 months meant she was weighing something carefully rather than avoiding an answer. And when she finally spoke, her voice was steadier than he had any right to expect, given what he had just asked her. "I got on the wrong carriage in Helena because I decided, for the first time in my life, what my own future was going to hold, instead of letting my uncle decide it for me. I did not expect that decision to lead me here, but I have spent 3 months choosing this ranch, this town, and you, every single day since, and I find I am not interested in stopping now simply because the choosing has become easier than it was in the beginning." She reached over and took his hand, the first time she had done so without his offering it first. "Yes, Silas, I will stay. And this time it will be because I chose to, plain and whole, with nothing pretending otherwise." He did not kiss her there on the porch, not with the hands still finishing chores within sight of the yard, but he held her hand steady in his and watched the last of the summer light go gold and soft across the lower pasture, over water that had never once left his keeping, over a garden that had come back to life under her hands the same fortnight she arrived, and over a ranch that had been quietly, thoroughly remade by a woman who had arrived by another name's mistake and stayed by her own true choice. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.